Hello, everyone. So we're going to switch topics from the hyperscalers to security, and as I said in my opening, we see security as central to the marketplace, and there's an interesting interaction happening between the traditional security players, SD-WAN, and how they're managing to merge these solutions, all the while increasing cloud capabilities. So we thought Palo Alto would be a wonderful organization to talk about this, especially since they've just bought CloudGenix, as well, of course, as being a major player in the security market. So without any more ado, I'll turn it over to Stuart, who can introduce himself, and I'll go off stage and leave it to you, Stuart.
Yes, thanks, Gail. Thanks for the invitation to present. My name is Stuart Borgman. I have responsibility for the service provider systems engineering team here at Palo Alto Networks. Clearly a market segment for us, which is very important, is the service provider market. And we see a number of dynamics and shifts that are taking place in the marketplace, which are really impacting the way that services are going to be built today and in the future. And I think what I'm going to touch on is potentially three trends that we see. Sorry, I now need to figure out how to. So there's probably three trends that are taking place that are really shaping security in the marketplace. And I think the first one is the cloud adoption. Been lots of conversations, and the previous presenters really touched on this. The migration towards cloud, which the enterprises are using, whether it be SaaS, whether it be infrastructure as a service. The second one is around remote user mobility, the increased need for users to be able to log into their applications, to their services remotely. And then finally, the digital transformation, the move of applications to the digital infrastructure driving the business trends. I think one thing, and it's been touched on in these sessions, is that COVID has been a really good example of accelerating this trend. A lot of these statistics come from 2019, pre-COVID, but clearly we've seen the spike. Now, depending on who you talk to, you might suggest that the trends have fundamentally changed, or they may go back to normal. But I think that definitely the trend is in the direction which these are influencing the way that we build our networks. And I think what we've seen is that as they evolve, clearly we've been adding components to this infrastructure. We've been adding SD-WAN, remote access technologies, and trying to engineer these networks such they can deliver to these new service requirements. What that means is that we're adding complexity. Complexity is certainly increasing these networks as we're adding these components to it, but also security gaps. We've been trying to engineer the network such we can work out which services need to be unsecure, which services need to be secure. Does the traffic have to transition through certain parts of the network, which actually ends up resulting in poor user experience as well, because we're not taking the most direct path. So it really needs a thought around how do we look at these services, because security is fundamental, but also the way we build our networks needs to be simple to make sure that we have the right user experience. So really we need to see and work out how we change the network. Interestingly, Gartner in 2019 had a good insight to it, which really was the introduction of the Secure Access Service Edge. And they understood that the way that we're accessing the network is completely inverting itself. There are more users, devices, applications, services, which are located outside of the enterprise, not inside the enterprise. So therefore, the way that we have to look at risk, the way we have to look at security needs to change. And fundamentally, we need to start to look at how we converge security within the cloud delivered secured access service edge. And this has really been the initial insight into the shift, and that shift continues to take place. We thought it was a little bit of fun. We'd open a poll up just to see from the audience those that are currently or thinking about offering a SASE service. So if backstage wouldn't mind opening the poll up, there really is four areas we're thinking about. You may be thinking, what is SASE? It may be we are considering SASE. We may be not offering it, but we're already offering that service. So I don't know if that poll is come up. So I'll leave the poll up during the presentation and hopefully give some insight into what people are thinking. So in terms of Palo Alto Networks and the way we look at this and how do we view the SASE architecture, well, we see it as a single fabric, a single consistent model where users, consumers can go through a secure fabric, a single connectivity model that takes you into the fabric, that provides this security layer, simplifies it, and really then delivers around the different services. So what we end up with is a network as a service. Network as a service delivering global, private, and high performance network connectivity. So we're overcoming this complexity issue. We're overcoming this issue of real-time performance being impacted by having to go through convoluted paths. So really being able to simplify this overall network architecture. And as a result of it, you end up with best-in-class network connectivity. And then as well, being able to use, and this shouldn't prelude or exclude using certain technologies. So SD-WAN becomes an important part of this. It needs to be able to integrate into this. 5G, we touched on 5G earlier. Is that going to be a technology for the future or not? I think we will have our own opinions around that, but certainly that plays an important part of this. And MPLS as well, we're seeing trends and shifts away from MPLS, but there's a lot of enterprises will continue to use MPLS for many years to come because it certainly brings some level of value still to these customers. So taking a step down and looking what's underneath this secure fabric, well, there's really two parts of it. There's a network service layer. This network service layer delivers those functions, some that I touched on earlier, SD-WAN, IPsec, policy-based forwarding. The quality of service, clearly quality of service remains important, certainly over an internet-based infrastructure, but also over a fixed line infrastructure. VPNs, networks of service, all these fundamental security service layers need to be there. And then at the security layer, how do we deliver the security functionality which is critical around this? The CASB, the zero-touch network access, the firewalls as service, DNS, all these critical important components. In many ways, these components are being delivered through technologies as next generation firewall, which was a key value proposition, or is a key value proposition. And from Palo Alto Networks, we introduced the next generation firewall about 10 years ago. And that technology is fundamental to this, and we believe it can bring real value to this overall SASE architecture. We see this convergence of network and security coming into a single service layer. So if you look then at the service provider model, and the service provider model is really an end-to-end model, A end to B end. So that's how they create value. We certainly see here in Europe, a lot of enterprises still very much requiring managed service infrastructure so they can have the end-to-end connectivity and build up the different layers. At the overall layer, the top layer, we have the applications, the private cloud. The private cloud services will continue. Many of those will be in the service provider background or connected to the service provider backbone. The public cloud services, the internet services, the SaaS services, which also are consumed through the cloud infrastructure. So we have these two major components of the overall infrastructure, the service provider infrastructure, the cloud infrastructure, which deliver these services. Each have an important role to play. Then there's a network connectivity. There's the MPLS, the broadband, the 5G, the LTE services. They provide the connectivity which link up into the backbones and the cloud infrastructure. And then there's the customer sites. And of course, there's different ways we need to be able to connect into it. There's going to be those that are working in the main and branch offices that's going to want to use SD-WAN technologies. And then there's going to be the small branches which may not use SD-WAN or may use SD-WAN, some level of connectivity. And the user, the global protect user, i.e. the SLVPN user, those that want to connect directly from their laptop, from their phone, from their portable device. So in terms of connectivity models, we see the model from SD-WAN potentially running up through broadband, through LTE. At the same time, maybe into the backbone, the SP backbone, where they may need to go into the private network. And as well as that, being able to connect out through into both services to be able to have resilience. And then finally as well, we need to have the SSL VPN devices or the VPN devices going directly into those infrastructure. At the bottom level, the different technologies, the SD-WAN technology is evolving, and we mentioned before that Palo Alto Networks made a critical acquisition of CloudGenix, which is really around how we drive application level SD-WAN services. How do we look at the actual application performance and make the best determination path to where the services need to go, but also to enable us to make application-based decisions. There may be some applications that we don't need to secure. All the other services go up into the backbone, the cloud infrastructure, which we can provide full levels of security to. There might be applications like streaming video, for example, that we may not need to. We could send those directly that don't need to be secure, but we can make those application level decisions. So we end up with an end-to-end architecture, but there's clearly components around that as this gets built out into a managed service, into an MSP environment, that we need to have a single unified management that manages all of these components in one single pane of glass. We need to have it to be multi-tenanted. But the other key component as well is around a unified data lake. How do we take logs from this whole infrastructure and use those logs to be able to determine the performance, but also use those fundamentally as we start to build out the security insights? The security landscape continues to change, so we need to be able to use login and data. We touched on this earlier in terms of being able to use big data to be able to determine the behavior of this infrastructure. And that's an important aspect of the Palo Alto network strategy. And of course, with this, you end up having an architecture that enables you to use the service provider infrastructure, but also the cloud infrastructure. And the real value of the cloud infrastructure is the reach. Being able to touch global reach. A lot of enterprises today have true global reach where they might have either sites or their organization moving around the globe and need to have the closest connectivity. Obviously, we talked earlier about edge communication and being able to have communication to the closest POP, so latency is a key issue. Connectivity, costs, all these aspects around it, that means that global reach is an important aspect of this architecture, as well as being able to go directly into either private or public cloud services. So global reach is really important and an aspect around SASE that really can deliver in this unified infrastructure. Consistent services wherever you are, consistent security wherever you are with global reach. The other aspect as well, which is worth talking about when we talk about SASE, is a lot of these services we're now connecting onto are cloud-based services. And what we're seeing is a change in the way that security has to be applied in these new cloud-based services. Traditionally, virtualization was virtualization around an operating system. The way cloud services have been built, this is application virtualization. It's using microservices. It's actually breaking up the applications into multiple containers. Each of those would be immutative, so effectively they may have persistence and IP addressing. So it makes security a much different challenge. So actually what we think as well as part of the SASE architecture is you need to think about how do you apply cloud security? And that's around identity. The concept of identity changes. The concept of authentication changes. We need to think differently about how we do authentication, identification through this service. Clearly you have security in this service layer, but also you need to have linkage into the cloud infrastructure to be able to secure that as well. We need to have a cloud security posture which looks at those applications, looks at the construct of the software to make sure it's fundamentally secure. And how do we apply appliances? How do we apply governance around it as well in terms to make sure that we're applicable to all the various regulations that's taking place, whether it be HIPAA or GRPD, cloud security, etc. And another piece which I touched on earlier was the data lake. So what is it that the data lake can give us in terms of security? So there's a number of different aspects around what we're working on, around using login to be able to use machine learning, to be able to look at the different security requirements, the changing security landscape, to look for malware detection. What's the malware that's arriving? Looking for malware that is both known and unknown. The critical piece is how do we identify new malware? And clearly, big data analytics, machine learning, AI are really important aspects around being able to identify new malware that's taking place. IoT security, an emerging market which will become much more relevant as we see the rollout of 5G. Also, orchestration, automation, really important to be understand what's the behavior inside this overall network. Identity as well. We talked about identity as the identity users coming in, but also identity within inside the cloud environment. So data and consistent data security becomes an important aspect to across this whole SASE architecture, the data feeds, and to be able to understand and work out how the changing security landscape is evolving. So in summary, there's 4 areas we need to think about: the speed and agility. How does this network perform? Is it simple? Are we trying to decomplex the environment? Have we got consistent security? Consistent security to the cloud, to the private infrastructure, consistent security whether it's going across an MPS network, whether it's going across an LTE network, a broadband network. Driving down the operational costs, reducing complexity will drive down costs. It's a very cost-sensitive market in the MSSP space, and we need to make sure that these costs are reduced and it's operational efficient. And then finally, and really what's important as we start to deploy these services and we invert this model where more and more consumers, users are outside the network, we need to improve the overall customer experience. And that's the objective here, to make a consistent, simple layer that enables it to be both secure and high performing as well, to deliver to the emerging challenges and trends that we see in the marketplace. So that's my presentation.
Thank you, sir.
We've got the poll results as well. Gail, I hope that
yeah, let me check on the poll. It was, first of all, let me thank you. It's very clear presentation, and I think frames a lot of the issues really well. Do we have the poll results? I'm checking backstage. In the chat. Ah, here we go. It's up further. Just 1 second. Let me read them out to you. So there's about 13% who in the audience who said, "What's a SASE solution?"
Okay.
The very honest guys. 75% say they're considering a solution. 0% say not offering, and 13% say they already have a full SASE solution.
Wow. Okay, that's a high percentage. That's good.
Yeah, great. Well, we thank you, Stuart, and
thank you.
Audience will be just shifting over to another presentation, so don't go away. There's going to be a break right after the next presentation, but give us a couple minutes to get the next speaker set up. Thanks, Stuart. You can.
Thank you.